The crystal wine glasses clinked as Margaret Chen topped off everyone's drink, her perfect hostess smile never wavering. The monthly family dinner at the Chen mansion was a carefully orchestrated show of wealth and status, where every detail had to be just right. Even the way she looked down her nose at me, her son's wife of 3 years, was perfectly calculated. "So, Emily," she said, swirling her wine with practiced elegance, still teaching at that community college. I dabbed my napkin against my lips before responding. "Actually, I'm a full professor now at State University. Just got tenure last month." "Oh, how quaint." Margaret exchanged knowing looks with her husband Richard, the CEO of Pacific Regional Bank. "Though I suppose someone has to teach the basics to undergraduates." My husband James squeezed my hand under the table. He knew how these dinners went, the subtle digs, the barely concealed contempt for my chosen profession. To the Chen family, success meant only one thing: banking. "Emily teaches graduate-level economics and monetary policy," James defended, though we both knew it wouldn't help. Richard Chen chuckled, cutting into his perfectly cooked wagyu steak. "Monetary policy? In a classroom? That's like learning to swim by reading a book. Real banking, real money. That's where you learn how the economy actually works." I caught my sister-in-law Jessica's smirk from across the table. As Pacific Regional's newly appointed Vice President of Investment Strategy, she never missed a chance to reinforce her superior position in the family hierarchy. Speaking of real banking, Jessica chimed in, "Daddy, should we tell them about the new acquisition?" Richard's chest puffed up with pride. Pacific Regional just acquired Midwest Trust. Added another $50 billion to our portfolio. Now that's what I call practical economics. "How wonderful," I said softly, taking a sip of wine to hide my expression. I'd seen the preliminary reports on that acquisition, but they didn't need to know that. Not yet. "You know, Emily," Margaret leaned forward with fake concern. "James mentioned you've been working late recently. If you're finding teaching too demanding, I'm sure Richard could find something suitable for you at the bank. Entry level, of course." James started to protest, but I placed my hand on his arm. "That's very thoughtful, Margaret, but I'm actually quite busy with some research for the Federal Reserve." "The Federal Reserve?" Jessica laughed out loud. "Grading papers for them too." I smiled and turned the conversation to safer topics. Jessica's recent vacation in the Maldives, Richard's new yacht, Margaret's charity gala. Let them talk. Let them assume. They had no idea who really sat at their table. Later that night, as James and I drove home to our modest suburban house, a constant source of disapproval from his family, he apologized again for their behavior. "I'm so sorry, Hem. They just can't see past their own world." "It's fine," I assured him, checking my phone as another confidential email came in. "Sometimes it's better if people underestimate you." "Still," he sighed, "I wish they could see how brilliant you are. The research you do, the impact you have." I squeezed his hand. James was the only one who knew the full scope of my work, and even he didn't know everything about the report I was finalizing. Back home, in my study, I opened my laptop and returned to the document I'd been working on for the past 6 months. The official letterhead read, "Federal Reserve Special Committee on Banking Stability and Risk Assessment." As lead analyst and committee chair, I've been investigating systemic risks in regional banking systems. What had started as a routine review had uncovered something far more concerning, particularly in certain aggressive West Coast institutions. My phone buzzed. A secure message from Marcus Wong at the Treasury Department. "Dr. Harrison, preliminary findings confirmed. Pacific Regional's exposure worse than initially suspected. Full review needed ASAP." I typed back, "Agreed. Preparing final report now. Meeting still scheduled for Monday." "Yes, 9 a.m. Full oversight committee attendance required." I sat back, thinking about Richard Chen's smug announcement of the Midwest Trust acquisition. He had no idea that the bank he just bought was a house of cards, its assets grossly overvalued, combined with Pacific Regional's already precarious leverage ratios. Another message came in, this time from Sarah Martinez at the SEC. "Found those irregularities you flagged in the PR Midwest deal. How soon can you review?" "Sending secure link now," I replied. "Focus on section 7.4, the derivative exposure calculations." I worked late into the night, fine-tuning my analysis. Every number had to be perfect, every conclusion ironclad. Because on Monday morning, I would walk into the Federal Reserve's regional headquarters not as Emily Harrison, the simple professor the Chens dismissed so easily, but as Dr. Emily Harrison, the nation's leading expert on banking system stability. And I would present evidence that their precious Pacific Regional Bank was about to become the biggest banking crisis since 2008. I thought about Margaret's condescending smile, Jessica's mocking laughter, Richard's dismissal of my theoretical knowledge. They thought teaching economics meant I couldn't understand real banking. They were about to learn how theory and practice could collide in devastating ways. My phone buzzed one final time, the Fed chairman's office confirming Monday's emergency session. I sent a quick acknowledgement, then closed my laptop. James was already asleep when I came to bed. As I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't help but wonder how the Chens would react when they realized that the professor they'd looked down on for so long was about to decide their bank's fate. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about protecting the financial system from exactly the kind of reckless behavior Richard Chen had practiced for years, believing his bank was too important to fail, his position too powerful to challenge. Monday would change everything. And somewhere deep inside, a small human part of me looked forward to seeing their faces when they realized who really understood real banking after all. I drifted off to sleep, mentally rehearsing my presentation. In less than 48 hours, the Chens would learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one they never bothered to take seriously. And sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's simply doing your job so well that your enemies destroy themselves. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp. I arrived at the Federal Reserve's regional headquarters at 7:30 a.m., well before the 9 a.m. emergency session. The security guard nodded respectfully as I passed through. No need to check my credentials. As committee chair, I've been practically living here for the past 6 months. Dr. Harrison, Marcus Wong from Treasury greeted me in the conference room, already reviewing documents. Final numbers came in from the SEC overnight. It's worse than we thought. I nodded, setting up my laptop. Pacific Regional's leverage ratio? Nearly double what they reported. The Midwest Trust acquisition was just smoke and mirrors. Sarah Martinez from the SEC joined us, carrying a thick folder. We found evidence of systematic misrepresentation in their risk assessments. Dr. Harrison, your model predicting their vulnerability was spot on. I pulled up my presentation as other committee members filed in. Representatives from the FDIC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, state banking regulators. At 8:45, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Dad just got an urgent call. Heading to Bank HQ. Everything okay? I replied simply, turn on CNBC in about an hour. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened and Richard Chen strode in, flanked by his executive team and lawyers. The confidence drained from his face as he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table. Emily? What are you? This must be a mistake. No mistake, Mr. Chen, I said calmly. Please, take a seat. We have a lot to discuss. I was told this was a Federal Reserve Oversight Committee meeting, he blustered. Where is Chairman Williams? Chairman Williams is joining virtually. I gestured to the large screen where several faces were already connected. As committee chair, I'll be leading today's session. Richard's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror as he realized the truth. The simple professor he'd dismissed for years was about to decide his bank's fate. For those just joining, I began, my voice steady. I'm Dr. Emily Harrison, chair of the Federal Reserve Special Committee on Banking Stability and Risk Assessment. We're here to address serious concerns about Pacific Regional Bank's stability, particularly in light of the recent Midwest Trust acquisition. The first slide appeared, a complex network diagram showing Pacific Regional's risk exposure. I'd simplified it considerably from my academic work, but it still drew gasps from the room. Over the past 6 months, our investigation has uncovered a pattern of increasingly risky behavior. I continued. Pacific Regional's actual leverage ratio is 38% higher than reported, largely due to hidden exposure in derivatives markets. Richard's lawyer tried to interject, but I held up my hand. Please hold questions. We have a lot to cover. For the next hour, I methodically laid out everything we'd found. The creative accounting that hid true risk levels. The Midwest Trust acquisition that was supposed to shore up their balance sheet but actually made things worse. The derivatives trades that could trigger a cascade of failures across multiple institutions. In conclusion, I said, changing to the final slide, Pacific Regional's current position represents an unacceptable risk to the banking system. This committee recommends immediate regulatory intervention, including temporary suspension of trading in PR stock, restructuring of the executive team, and a detailed audit of all positions. Richard finally found his voice. This is absurd. You can't. You're just a professor. Dr. Harrison, Chairman Williams spoke from the screen, is one of our most respected banking systems experts. Her models predicting the 2008 crisis are now standard teaching tools at Harvard Business School. Perhaps if you'd attended any of her lectures at the Fed's annual banking symposium, you'd know that. My phone was buzzing constantly now. News of Pacific Regional's trading suspension had hit the markets. James sent another text. Mom and Jessica watching CNBC. Your name just came up as Fed committee chair. Mom dropped her coffee cup. The next few hours were a blur of technical discussions, legal negotiations, and increasingly desperate attempts by Richard's team to avoid the inevitable. By late afternoon, Pacific Regional stock had dropped 60%. Richard had been suspended as CEO, and federal regulators were installing an interim management team. I packed up my materials as the room slowly emptied, regulators and lawyers breaking into smaller groups to handle various aspects of the intervention. Richard remained seated, staring blankly at the table. Why didn't you tell us? He asked finally. All those dinners, all those times would it have mattered? I replied quietly. Would you have listened to my concerns about your risk management if I had? He had no answer. That evening, I arrived home to find James waiting with a glass of wine and a proud smile. You were amazing, he said, pulling up video clips of various financial news channels discussing the dramatic intervention, led by banking expert Dr. Emily Harrison. How's your family taking it? He laughed. Mom called 5 times, trying to explain that she always knew you were smart and just wanted to push you to reach your potential. Jessica hasn't said a word, but she took down all her social media posts about being VP at PR. I sighed, kicking off my heels. You know, this isn't how I wanted things to play out. The bank's problems were real. They needed to be addressed. I know, he said softly. That's what makes it even better. You didn't do this for revenge. You did it because it was right. My phone buzzed again. A message from Sarah at the SEC. Preliminary audit findings even worse than expected. Good call on pushing for immediate intervention. Over the next few weeks, the full story of Pacific Regional's problems emerged. Financial papers wrote detailed articles about how a brilliant academic had spotted systemic risks that traditional bank examiners missed. Harvard Business Review requested an article about my analytical methods. 3 major banks hired consulting firms to implement my risk assessment models. The monthly family dinner was, unsurprisingly, canceled. But 2 weeks after the intervention, Margaret Chen appeared at my university office. She stood awkwardly, taking in the academic awards, the published papers, the photos of me with various Federal Reserve governors. She started, then tried again. I'm sorry, Emily. We were wrong about you, about so many things. I gestured for her to sit. Banking isn't just about making deals, Margaret. It's about understanding systems, seeing patterns, managing risk. That's what I teach. That's what I research. Richard always said academic knowledge didn't matter in real banking, she said quietly. Now he's banned from the industry and you're advising the Fed chairman. I leaned forward. Would you like to know what I'm working on now? She looked up, surprised. New models for community banking. Ways to make smaller banks more stable, more competitive. Because banking shouldn't just be about big profits and bigger risks. It should be about serving communities, building sustainable growth. Could you tell me more? For the next hour, I explained my ideas about reforming regional banking. To my surprise, Margaret asked intelligent questions, showing genuine interest. By the end, something had shifted between us. You know, she said as she stood to leave, we're trying to restart the family dinners. At a slightly smaller house now, of course. Would you and James come? I smiled. I'd like that. Though maybe less talk about banking this time? She actually laughed. Definitely less banking talk. 1 year later, I sat in my office at the Federal Reserve, where I now split my time with teaching. A frame on the wall held the Harvard Business Review cover story. The professor who saw it coming. How academic rigor is reshaping banking oversight. My phone buzzed, James reminding me about dinner with his family. These days, the conversations were different. Jessica had found her calling running a microlending nonprofit. Richard, humble but wiser, was teaching business ethics at a local college. And Margaret had become one of my strongest supporters in promoting financial literacy education. As I packed up to leave, I thought about what I told my graduate students in our first class each semester. Banking isn't about power or status. It's about understanding how money flows through systems, how those systems affect real people's lives. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from studying the theory, not just chasing the practice. They listen more attentively now that the Pacific Regional case study is part of the standard curriculum. Walking to my car, I passed a group of students discussing my latest research paper. One of them noticed me and nudged the others. They quickly fell silent, watching me with a mix of awe and nervousness. I smiled, remembering how it felt to be underestimated. "Don't let me interrupt," I said. "Though if you're discussing the section on derivative exposure calculations, I'd be happy to explain my methodology." Their faces lit up, and soon we were deep in discussion about financial system dynamics. Because that's the real lesson in all of this. True expertise isn't about titles or power or family connections. It's about understanding, about seeing the patterns others miss, and about using that knowledge to make things better. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right in ways that help everyone, even those who never believed in you in the first place. That's not just a lesson in banking, that's a lesson in life.